Your emotional equity of relevance is fundamentally important when you're trying to psychologically and mentally grow. However, when this train gets off the tracks and the puzzle pieces of adolescent development aren't readily available, far too many teens are being subjected to what is the troubled teen industry. According to a report entitled The Kids Are Not All Right, How Private Equity Profits Off of Behavioral Health Services for Vulnerable and At-Risk Youth. The troubled teen industry is expected to have a net worth and value of more than $23 billion. The $23 billion refers to congregate care facilities such as wilderness and boot camps for youth with behavioral issues, residential treatment programs, centers or facilities, hospitals, therapeutic boarding schools, or behavioral modification programs. Furthermore, according to the American Community Survey, 17% of America's youth under the age of 18 in the United States are living below the poverty line, which translates to more than 10 million children living in families with low income, which means that they live below the federal poverty line, which means that they're considered to be at risk and has a direct correlation to their behavioral issues. One person that knows all about this lifestyle is my friend, Corey Jentry. He is a troubled teen treatment survivor and industry insider who's dedicated to raising awareness, standards, and safety in mental health care. Jentry says as a teenager, he was drawn into one of these programs which he thought was going to be a lifeline, which turned into a trap. He says he was manipulated, controlled, and abused, which he said left deep scars. And he says that countless kids are going through the same experiences still today. So, he is now dedicated to helping families, educators, and advocates spot red flags, protect kids, and push for real reform. This PhD recipient in political science from the London School of Economics joined me this week to have an in-depth and wide-ranging discussion on the troubled teen industry and how we protect the best interest of the child when raising teenagers to ensure that they have the best life possible moving forward. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to dive into your story and how you're making a difference. Great to see you, and happy Thursday to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate the warm welcome and happy to be here on the show.
Absolutely. Now, Corey, I wanted to start by asking you about your personal connection to the troubled teen industry, because you tell me that you were drawn into this lifestyle because you thought it would be a lifeline, but it turned into a trap, my friend. So I'm wondering if you can tell me what you meant by that and why this work is so important to you.
Sure. Thanks so much for that great question, Kevin. And I often talk about being, a very troubled teenager when I was young. I came from a very uh, dysfunctional, would probably be a nice way of putting it, family. But we had a lot of problems. So my mother had some significant mental health issues. My father was trying to just kind of keep it all together and working multiple jobs to do that. And I had a variety of problems. I started experimenting with some substances. I was getting bullied at school. There were some learning deficiencies that I was dealing with on top of just being a prepubescent or pubescent teenager, in addition to the struggles that come along with that. And like a lot of kids, the troubled teen industry or these programs were presented to me and to my family as kind of an end all be all solution to all of our problems. It was really like, hey, I remember going into this program and having the initial conversations with them, and it was basically just them telling me how screwed up I was, how difficult my life had been up until that point, which was not a difficult, from a sales standpoint, it was not something that was hard to sell to somebody like me. But also that they had the answer was kind of the most important component of it. They were like, look, we know you're struggling. We know that you're having all of these problems, and we have a solution that can really fix all of those for you. And so for somebody like me and the circumstances that I was in and the kind of life that I was coming out of, it was very seductive, because not only were they offering, very concrete solutions to what I thought were insurmountable problems, they were also offering kind of a ready-made community and family that I could step into, which for somebody like me that didn't really have a community, and the family that I did have was, quite dysfunctional and very broken up. It really seemed like a savior. But once I was brought into the fold, so to speak, of those programs, it quickly started becoming apparent that it was more about compliance and rule following than it was any kind of real substantive solutions towards anything that would have been beneficial to me whatsoever. And really, my 5-year stay in that treatment program was just a series of disillusionments with that kind of ideology and doctrine that they were, really kind of implanting in me and upon me at that time. And the reason that I say that it was a major kind of sense of disconnect for me was because the more that I kept trying their solutions that were supposed to fix all my problems, my problems didn't get any better, and two, the solutions didn't really seem to work. In fact, they just kind of seemed to exacerbate things and make things worse for me, both personally as well as mentally and emotionally, which are areas that I was really struggling with at the time. And it also made a lot of things a lot harder, just from a relational standpoint, because once I was in the treatment program, like so many of these troubled teen programs, is I was completely taken out of my environment, completely taken away from my family. I was isolated from everyone and everything that I had known. And I was really sort of taken out of reality and put in this kind of alternate environment and community that was completely detached from and didn't have anything to do with the kind of day-to-day realities that myself and the rest of the world operate in. So from my experience, I really found it to not only be not effective, but quite counter-effective and, in fact, destructive in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm curious, based on the background of your story, Corey, how do you find the sort of concept of mental resilience and really overcoming that portion of your life to form the beliefs that you have today? What are your thoughts there on mental resilience, my friend?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, and I often think that in the therapeutic world, particularly with teenagers and troubled teens, particularly individuals that have mental health or emotional or perhaps learning or developmental problems, that we all like to talk about this notion of resiliency as if and we kind of talk about it in these like woo woo sort of terms and things that are really non definable, but really what I talk about and what I think about when I think of mental resiliency is a lot of it's a lot of what we often talk about as this kind of woo woo ethereal concept thing is actually very concrete and tangible. And I like to think about it as almost like a form of mental hygiene. You know, it's like we build resilience, and mental resilience is built through doing little things every day. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. You know, good dental hygiene isn't just a one-time thing where you go to the dentist and they do a deep clean on you. Dental hygiene is something that you go to the dentist and you get a deep clean, and then you do things on a daily basis that sort of assist with that process, and the basis and the byproduct of doing these little things day in and day out, and maybe these sort of spot check things a couple times a year or once a year, is that you end up building a form of resilience. And the thing about resiliency is it's a lot like hygiene. It's like you don't really see the point of it while you're doing it, but you definitely see what you're missing when you don't do it over a period of time. And for me, the mental resilience and just the emotional resilience that I got of coming out of these programs and really just making it through this experience, what I learned is that it isn't the kind of big earth-shattering or almost like Paul on the road to Damascus, St. Paul on the road to Damascus kind of conversion moments. It's a lot of just kind of day in, day out things where we're really just putting one foot in front of the other, where I had to put one foot in front of the other and just do the things that I needed to do to get through that particular day, or sometimes even that particular moment without really falling apart. Because coming through those types of programs and having those types of experiences on top of the existing mental health and substance use issues that a lot of young people are already kind of struggling with on a baseline, when you factor that in with a bunch of trauma and tragedy that you often experience in these troubled teen programs, just by virtue of being there and being around them, it can really do a number on you, and it can really feel like coming out of those situations when you're experiencing the PTSD or the trauma or just the tragedy of those incidents. It can really be difficult to just take care of basic things. I found for individuals, you know, we talk a lot about like, oh, getting jobs or doing this or doing that, but for a lot of people that are coming out of those types of situations, just getting out of bed every day can be a challenge. So what I talk to a lot of families and individuals that are coming out of circumstances and are struggling with circumstances like this, as I did, are really just teaching them kind of daily coping mechanisms and daily, really exercises emotionally, mentally, and physically that they can do with themselves that really kind of build up that resilience and that, what I call emotional distress tolerance. Because there's no way of getting around the fact that, whether you're in treatment or coming out of treatment or not in treatment, whether you have a problem or don't have a problem, nobody gets through this life or through a day really unscathed. We all have to deal with adversity. We all have to deal with problems. We all have to deal with ourselves in one varying degree or another. And, what I think good treatment, what good mental health care, and what good overall resilience does is it helps individuals build the capacity to manage and get through those types of situations.
Yeah, you talk about emotional distress and having that as a sort of a byproduct of this situation. And I'm curious also to ask you, Corey, about the role of the parents in this situation, because the way cultural diversity and the the environment that we're brought up in, how does that sort of play in our endurance to sort of endure emotional distress tolerance? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's another really great question. And I mean, most of the research and the data shows that individuals that have a strong family support system, whether that be, direct familiar support, financial, or just like a cultural family unit that they're able to rely on. All of the data shows that individuals, whether it's male, female, black, white, Latino, it doesn't matter, all of the data consistently shows that individuals have a better chance of developing those skills and making it through difficult emotional, mental, and even physical turmoil, and recovering from that more than individuals do that do not have those systems and those mechanisms built into place. So there's a lot of research that supports the role of the family in building emotional resiliency and just overall success rates. But I would also argue that sometimes the family and cultural systems that individuals are coming out of can sometimes be a big aggravator and driver of the problems that individuals are facing. So, what I run into a lot when I'm working with young adults or teens and their families, with trying to find treatment placement or just advising on what the next steps to take for that individual might be, is you run into a lot of parents that have the best intentions for their kids, and there are different spectrums of what that looks like. There are kind of what we call the helicopter parents that are just constantly hovering over their children, and they're dipping in and dipping out constantly, being like, what's going on here, what's going on there. That can cause a lot of problems for kids, because at the end of the day, we're human beings, and we do need to stand on our own 2 feet. So sometimes the methods and the tactics that family members will use, or that they adopt, whether that's cultural, or there's some religious underpinnings to that, or whatever it may be. Sometimes those can actually exacerbate and make it more difficult for the young person to kind of build those internal capacities and move forward. And it can also just create a lot of sort of, I call it reactive reactivities from the parents. So it's almost like the parents have their kind of ideas and their cultural underpinnings, and then the kid has their emotional disturbances. And when the parents react based on their kind of cultural underpinnings, those can have a net effect of kind of exacerbating the already difficult emotional responses that these kids are coming up with. I can give you a great example, just anecdotally from my own life. I grew up in a very Christian conservative family in the deep south of the United States. So from Augusta, Georgia, we were rurally poor, but very religious. My mother was Italian and grew up in a very strong Catholic family. My father was very much like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and grew up in that kind of environment. And those two religious components kind of converged to my upbringing. And part of that, there was a lot of religious doctrine. There was a lot of the shame and kind of cultural components that come along with that. And then what I call a lot of the like religious shoulds, so it's like, you should do this, you should do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. This is what a good Christian boy looks like. This is what a good Christian boy doesn't look like. So it just creates a lot of frames of reference. And when you already have kind of underlying mental, emotional, or substance use problems, those kind of cultural underpinnings can really just feed into the shame and cause a lot of reactivity. So my parents would, kind of react from one standpoint when they found out that I was using substances and having struggles. It really evoked kind of a quite a stark emotional reaction and behavioral response. Then it might have from a family that came from a more secular background, that were a little bit more educated, and maybe had more economic means. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the role of family, certainly, and where they're coming from, their socioeconomic capabilities, their educational standpoint, all of that is, and culture, of course, is all going to feed into the responses that they take with their kids, and then how those responses are taken in and interpreted by their family. So the role of the family is paramount in helping kids either recover, or it can also be a detriment in the disintegration process of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Corey, I know that you've got a PhD from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and we talked about marketing help versus long-term harm. And I'm wondering if you could go back and tell your a 16-year-old self one lesson that you wish you would have known then that you know now about how to cope and survive during that time. I'm curious, what would be the message to your 16-year-old self?
Yeah, the message to my 16-year-old self is kind of the same message that I give to families and individuals today. And it's, kind of an old saying, but it's respect but suspect would be the best thing. So with any behavioral health company or therapist or any of the like mental health or behavioral health care industry, sciences, there's a lot of noise that's going on out there, and there was a lot of noise that was bestowed upon me when I was going into the industry. Individuals telling me like, "Oh, you have to do this, or you're going to die," or "Trust me" is another big thing. Like, "Trust me, I'm an expert in this. I've been doing this for a long time." Something that other people will say a lot. And then some people even have like a degree or a certification in it. So they may be a therapist, or they may be a PsyD, or they may be a doctor or whatever. And all of that is fine. But if it were me going back to my 15-year-old self when I was going into treatment, I would have told myself, like, look, you need to look into these people a bit more. And you need to look into these programs. I often tell families that they need to look into the programs, the treatment center programs that they're sending their kids to, in the same way that they would a private school or a university that they were going to send their kids away to. Because those institutions and those practitioners are going to have far more of an impact on your child and the direction that their life takes, far more than any teacher or university ever will. These places really do shape the mentality and mindsets of kids in ways that families can't even imagine. So if I were going back to my 16-year-old self, it would be like, trust but verify is a big thing. So I always tell families, look into these people, look into these programs, look into these practitioners, look into their license, look into where they went to school at, who supervised them, how long they've been accredited for. What did they do beforehand? Because quite frankly, a lot of these people that are spouting off nonsense as if it's some kind of recovery gospel, these people are amateurs. They have no clinical, educational, or real professional certifications or underpinnings to anything that they do. So really, you're kind of being guided by a lot of amateurs, and a lot of that is reflected in a lot of the data that gets put out by programs and watchdog organizations in terms of efficacy of methods, things like recidivism rates, all of that. So if you really dig into the data, you can really kind of see that a lot of these, despite the marketing material that a lot of them put out, there's not really a whole lot of there in terms of the results and evidence-based outcomes with a lot of these programs.
Yeah, Corey, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the idea of embracing the vulnerability of children while also looking for a reform to this industry. Because when teenagers are placed into these sorts of programs, oftentimes it's a cry out for assistance in sort of navigating a vulnerable part of their lives. So how do we both empower teens to respect their vulnerability while also giving them the help and guidance they need to get through these issues or challenges that they're experiencing to get them to these types of programs and facilities in the first place? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Sure. I think, again, it's a great question. And I think what I often talk to parents about a lot and families about, and some colleagues and peers in the field say this is that first of all, being a teenager is not a mental health diagnosis. The teenage years and adolescence are, by nature and by virtue of just being a teenager, they can be acrimonious. It can be quite tumultuous. You're learning a lot about yourself and your environment. So there's a lot of twists and turns and turmoils that come along that journey. And that is all okay. I think there's a notion that, particularly in today's society, that we shouldn't ever, and that kids shouldn't ever struggle. They should never be upset. They should never be pissed off. They should never be dysregulated. They should never be angry. All of those things are false. Like all the full spectrum of human emotions, everything from rage to deep loss, are just that. They're part of the human experience, and they need to be embraced in one way, shape, or form by families. What the point of treatment and long-term treatment programs are for individuals where that episode or that episode in their developmental process is maybe too much for the family to contain in a home environment, and that does happen where kids are, sometimes they become too aggressive or they become too violent. They don't have the emotional resilience to kind of tone down or tamp down, what can be quite dangerous and self-destructive impulses. Or there are some very real neurological or developmental problems that are going on that just prevent them from having those kind of normal stopgaps. And in situations like that, where you do need to take your kid out and you maybe do need to transfer your child into a more contained, clinically sophisticated and monitored environment, I always tell people that you need to slow that process down. So there tends to be a sense of urgency with all of this. It's like, okay, we have to do something right now. We have to do something right now. And part of that is driven from the perspective of the providers. And some of that is, a lot of that is just marketing. It's like they want to get the individual in because, quite frankly, Kevin, they can't start billing the insurance company or you until there's a warm body in their facility. So there's a very real monetary and marketing emphasis on, okay, I hate to say it in such a callous sales sense, but it's like, we really need to close this sale and we really need to do it right now. So you have to kind of divorce that from the actual clinical and physical health necessities that are going on there. So if you have a kid that is like really suicidal or really homicidal, that you think they're going to really hurt or kill themselves or maybe hurt or kill somebody else, then yes, those need to be like very fast decisions. And typically those can be taken with the help of a hospital and hospital care providers. So if you have a kid that you think is in some kind of situation with that, the first point of contact is to a hospital so that you can get them in front of physicians, providers, the real professionals that can really assess the situation and see like, okay, is this something we need to do now? Or is it something that we can kind of contain for a later time? They're usually able to do that in a hospital setting. And then from there, it just becomes a series of decisions that you and the family members need to make with in conjunction with that client. Because and I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but whether the family likes it or not, is you do have to include this other person into this decision making. And typically, that decision making process goes a lot better when you bring the individual in there. So instead of just treating the child as kind of this extraneous variable that you're going to just kind of throw out and then introduce into the decision making process, it really helps if you can include that individual in the decision making process while it's going on, because it just makes the transition into different levels of care so much easier. It helps building trust with that individual and getting buy-in from that individual during the process a whole lot easier. And it also helps keep the professionals and the providers in the loop of what's going on during that decision making process. So my that's a long way of answering the question, but my real answer would be is to really slow down and to make as sober, for lack of a better word, of a judgment with these decisions as you can make, because they are going to have very real impacts on the identified patient, whether that's your kid or a loved one or anyone else. It's going to have a real impact on that individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And Corey, I know that you're driven also by helping people through business success and transformation, and you're driven by one question that you ask yourself on a daily basis, and that's how strategy can be used not only to grow a business but also to impact lives in high-profile industries such as healthcare, technology, defense, and public policy. So I'm curious, why does that question drive you, and what sort of answers have you come up with to answer that very question, my friend?
Sure. Well, the overall strategic goals, I think, should you have to have a long game. So just like in business or life or anything else, is you really have to have a long game. And and the little day by day things that we often get wrapped up in, we forget many times that those have an end goal in sight. And if you're working with, whether it's a business that is just getting started, or maybe it's in trouble, or if it's just getting started, it's really important to figure out the overall why and what the strategic vision of that business is, because at the end of the day, it has to serve a purpose, right? And it's the same with an individual's journey in recovery. It's like, okay, what is the end goal of this? What is it that you want? And a lot of people think they know what they want when they start getting into things and they start doing the day in and day out. But then you get kind of lost in the process of it. And that's really where businesses and organizations and individuals go awry, is because they kind of lose sight of that overarching strategic plan, or what I call their primary driver or purpose. And if you lose that, then it's kind of like getting in a boat in the ocean without a compass. You can go a lot of places, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get to where you want to go, or it can take you a whole hell of a lot longer to get there if you don't have a plan. So that's why I always just, if it's with a company, if it's with an individual, it's with a family, 90% of the work that we do isn't on the day-to-day and the what to do next, because a lot of that kind of presents itself in de novo as it kind of develops. But really having like a strategic plan and a framework that you can operate off of, that is really where you don't just build scaffolding, but you really start putting meat on the bones of an organization and of a plan. And it's really in the meat of the bones of those organizations is really where the differentiators for a business are displayed. It's where most of the like special sauce is developed. And it's where most of the results are really found in. That's really where you get to the like interesting stuff is through that kind of overarching goal and progress, and it keeps everybody on some kind of a straight and narrow path, so to speak. Because if not, we all just like a lot of us, we have what I call a magpie mentality. We tend to get distracted very quickly by the next shiny object that just presents itself, and that's fine. But sometimes it's very easy to get lost in just the pursuit of the next shiny object, and lose that overall strategic vision and placement.
Yeah, and Corey, I'm also fascinated to get your perspective on this. In the family court or juvenile court system, we always hear the phrase or the concept of the best interest of the child. And I'm wondering what comes to mind for you in the work that you do when you're defining the concept of the best interest of the child, my friend. What comes to mind for you?
Well, the first question I always ask individuals or families uh, what they mean by in unpacking that is one of the first things is, have you asked the child? And it sounds kind of like just a matter of fact kind of question, but it's amazing how many people are like, oh, well, I just want what's best for my kid. I just want what's best for my kid, but they've not included their kid or their teen or their child, their loved one in that process, whatever. And now, granted, with some emotionally and mentally dysregulated and disabled children, that concept may be an anathema to actually what is in their best interest, and that sometimes is the pathology of the mental illness or the problem that they're facing. But nonetheless, it is important to just ask that question. And I can't tell you how many conversations and how many family dynamics have been shifted drastically just by including that question into the dynamic of, well, have you asked your child? That beyond that, the other components that step in are immediate safety. So, if you have a child or a loved one or someone that you're a family member that you're working with or trying to get help for, if that person is suicidal, if they're homicidal, if there's a history or a high probability of them being violent or engaging in harm against themselves or somebody else, then the overarching and primary interest is always safety and keeping that individual alive and keeping the individuals around them safe from harm. So I would say that is always paramount, is patient client safety is always first. And then beyond that, it goes into a discussion of really goals, and what that individual or the family's overall life goals are for their child, what their educational goals are for their child, what their professional goals are, what their developmental goals are. Then it just becomes a series of questions and conversations that the families, and again, including the patient, in these conversations need to have with one another about, like, okay, what is in the best interest? And sometimes we have to forego and suspend for a little bit our expectations or the family's expectations, because, yes, it may be the family's expectation that Junior does this and does that so that he can go to Harvard. And yes, in a logical sense, it may be from a career and just economic standpoint really good for Junior or Sarah to go to Harvard Medical School or whatnot and follow in the family's footsteps or take over the family business or go into the electrical trade like his father was, or whatever it is. But that may be an anathema to what the actual client wants. And sometimes those expectations can be the major drivers that are leading to the destructive patterns that the patients or the children are engaging in. Maybe Johnny wants to be a plumber and he doesn't want to go to Harvard. Maybe Sarah she doesn't want to be a doctor or a nurse. Maybe she wants to go to law school or pursue a career in journalism or something like that. So a lot of it is kind of dissecting expectations from actual care. And that can be a difficult conversation to have sometimes, but that's part of the progression path, is really coming into alignment and coming into clarity with the difference between, like, what are my expectations for my child, and then what are actually in the best interest of my child. And it can be challenging to tease those out sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Corey, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on this. Last December, our friends over at the Pew Research Center found that more than half of American teens spend more than 4 hours a day on social media, and that has a direct correlation to their mental health and sort of how their brains are wired. So, how do you think social media plays into sort of the behavioral aspect of today's American teen, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, there's no getting around it that the ubiquity and sort of ever presence of social media and its role in our kind of everyday lives, particularly in our kids' lives, has a marked effect on mental health. Something that I am constantly talking to parents and that we're constantly having these debates about is like screen time and how much screen time and what is good screen time and this and that. It for me, it's always about context. Context does mean everything. And, there are some families and systems that have very healthy relationships with social and individuals, rather families and individuals that have very healthy relationships with social media, and they kind of see it for what it is and they utilize it for what it is. And then there are others that just kind of engage in it recklessly. I often think that because it is such a permeating factor in our life, there is no way of getting around it. But I think again, it's just it's like it's a hygiene thing. I know I keep coming back to this, but a lot of it is just teaching our kids how to use it, teaching our kids and educating them on the byproducts uh, uh, of excessive use, of what that can mean, of really educating them on what social media is, that it's not really grounded in reality. It's a sales tool. It's a marketing tool. And I think that the more that we can um, educate our kids on that, of like, look, what you're looking at right now isn't really reality. It's the equivalent of a story. We call them stories on Instagram and social media, but they're just that. They're stories, and they should be taken for what they are, is a story. Some of them may have some useful underlying meaning. A lot of it is just rubbish that is there for like clickbait or visual aids. But I do think that kind of monitoring and teaching kids how to like moderate their social media use, just like you would with a television. You wouldn't let your kid just sit around and watch TV all day, every day, endlessly. You'd be like, look, you need to go outside. You need to do this. You need to do that. I think the same types of hygiene and just basic etiquette, for lack of a better word, around social media and screen time is so efficient, because you get folks on both extremes of it, where they're like, oh no, you need more of it and it's just what we are, and the more they immerse in it, the more they'll acclimate to it. And then you have people that kind of take a very restrictive component of it, where they're like, no, my kids don't do this or that. I mean, I tell all families I would restrict the level of social media accounts that your kids can have, at least until they're 16 years old. And then I would still, utilize a variety of parental controls on that. And then in the meantime, just educate, have conversations with your kids about it. I mean, a lot of times we like to talk to kids these like from an I thou standpoint. It's almost like I being the authority figure up here, and thou being the sort of child that I'm going to bestow my wisdom upon. And I think anybody that has kids or teenagers knows that that approach typically does not go down well with teenagers. And they're usually, if you talk to them like rational young adults and you treat them like rational young adults, most kids kind of respond to that fairly well. So that's just generally my approach to it. I tend not to advise families to, go down the very restrictive path. I mean, sometimes if there's some very pathological behaviors or destructive behaviors that are going on, that can be very necessary, and in those cases, it should be utilized. But for the most part, it's really just all good therapy and good treatment really is, whether it's with social media or any kind of process addiction or mental health disorder. It's really just evaluating and reassessing our relationship towards that stimulation or individual or substance or what have you. And it's really just teaching individuals and socializing and re-socializing individuals on the way that they interact and engage with those types of stimuli or objects.
Yeah, and Corey, I'm wondering the one message you would have for educators and parents about helping their teens, whether they be troubled or not, to make positive decisions and the steps you go through to help teens have a positive decision making mindset. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times with I have very mixed feelings about the whole notions of positivity and like positive thinking and all of that because they're very moot until we really get down to root ideas and root sort of genesis of where these ideas are coming from. So in that respect, when we talk about like positive thinking, what we're really talking about doing is like sprinkling a few little positive thoughts into a water of negative thinking. And it's like, okay, that might, take the bitterness out of it a little bit, but it doesn't really address the root causes of the problem. So, really what I engage with teenagers and with families and with, anyone businesses, anyone that I'm working with is really to take a reflexive approach and really to start questioning and really evaluating core ideas and concepts, whether that's with yourself as an individual around like, well, what do I believe and what are my core ideas around, my relationship to substances, my relationship to screen time, my relationship to women, my relationship to other men, my peer relationships, professional relationships, my life goals, what I value, really bringing those things into question because it's kind of like the goal of education. The best teachers that I've ever had, they didn't teach me what to think. They taught me how to think about things. They taught me how to question and dissect ideas and concepts and to really drill into them and ask myself kind of fundamental questions about not just what do I believe, but okay, why do I believe this? And what makes this belief true? What makes this belief concrete for me as an individual? That is part of the developmental process, but it's also just a really crucial part of the life process and the sort of human being process. And really, that's what I try to engage in with companies, with individuals, with educators, is I don't teach them what to think because it's very easy to teach someone what to think or to, disseminate my ideology or my particular brand of thinking onto another human being. But that's not very useful for most people because each individual is different. So it's important to think like, okay, what do these concepts mean to me? What do these ideas mean to me? And really getting educators to challenge kids and to help kids find their own way with that. And I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it's the best ideas and conclusions are the ones that we've come to on our own. And I kind of think with mental health, with mental well-being, with most things, these are emotional and intellectual and cognitive conclusions that we have to come to ourselves. So what we do as educators, as therapists, as clinicians, is we help individuals come to that process on their own. And then it's just a matter of method in how you go about doing that. So that would really be my underlying message to educators and everyone. It's like, stop telling people what to think and start teaching them how to think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Corey, I've got two questions left for you. The first is about the book you wrote on this subject entitled "Selling Sanity: The Troubled Teen Industry and the Insane Prize that Kids Pay." My friends, I'm curious about the process of writing the book, what you learned about yourself, if anything at all, my friend, and what you hope people get out of reading the book, because you get very personal in the book as well, my friends. curious about the process of writing the book, what you want people to take from it, and what you got out of personally writing it, my friend.
All really great questions, and I mean, I think to answer your question quite candidly, the last the biggest thing that I got out of writing the book, from the process of writing the book, was that I am definitely not done with therapy. That is the first and foremost. But it was very cathartic for me to go back over that period of my life, because it's something where, quite frankly, I had really uh, tried to forget about and really close the door on. And something that I learned from myself uh, in the process of writing that book was, I learned about my own emotional resiliency and how much uh, grit I do have. And I hope that other people kind of discover that for themselves through reading that book, and through going through whatever process it is that they're going through. Is that we are, what I wanted the book to convey is that we are so much more resilient and so much more capable than we ever give ourselves credit for. And we typically don't know those things until we go through them. And most of the time, there's an old Greek poet named Aeschylus who often talks about wisdom through the awful grace of God. And I certainly gained a lot of wisdom through what I thought was an awful situation that I was going through, but it turned out to be a real saving grace for me at the end of the day, because of the resilience and the gumption that I found out I had from it. And what I want readers to really get out of my story isn't that it's just my story. It's a micro narrative of a meta occurrence that's happening throughout the country, particularly with young men. And I really wanted to write my story and attach it to kind of a greater story out there. One, to validate the other survivor stories that are being written and that are currently out there, and let those people know that, yes, this stuff did happen. Because I in addition to going through the treatment industry as a patient, I also worked in the treatment industry as a consultant and a marketer, and as a business analyst, and a variety of different roles. So I can validate a lot of the survivors that are talking about this and that are trying to be silenced by these treatment programs, who are trying to say, like, oh, this didn't happen, or these were just a few isolated incidents, or, it was just a few bad apples, whatever. I'm here to say that all that is bullshit. Forgive me for saying it that way, but like, it is. This stuff is happening. Your experience was real, and it's more than a few bad apples. There is a systemic problem in the behavioral healthcare industry that needs to be addressed, and it is doing irreparable harm to children. And I think it's so important for men, particularly, to speak up, because so many of the stories and so much of the narrative that is in the treatment space around trauma and abuse and healing and all of that it's very female centric. So a lot of the voices there are women, and there's nothing against that. They need to be there, and I hope that they continue to do that. But I do think that there is a very real need and a very real place for the male perspective and the male story in this process and in the survivor narrative. And I wanted to express that. I thought that it was very important, because young men, particularly young boys, are dying and suffering immensely from behavioral health issues, from suicidal ideation, and they tend to be the ones that are the worst abused in these treatment centers. I mean, there's a reason that men are exponentially overrepresented in the prison systems. The men are exponentially more the victims of violent crimes. Men are 1 in 4 men, or 1 in 3 men, experience some form of sexual abuse in their life, and it goes reported, unreported, or underreported. So the male suffering in this space is very real. And part of it is like cultural, because, we got to man up and daddy's little soldier doesn't cry, that whole mentality. But it's really important for men to be vulnerable, and it's okay for men to be vulnerable. And it's important for men to share their stories of being abused, and surviving that.
Absolutely. And Corey, this is a question that we could produce another podcast on, but it's something I wanted to end on because I wanted to get your perspective. So, if you had the opportunity to have one sort of rallying message to the people that make the decisions on how these facilities are operated or how parents look at raising teenagers, I'm wondering, it's a roundabout way of asking you about what do you think is the overall solution? Now, you just talked about in your last answer the need for more male communication and involvement in this space, but I'm curious, what do you think is a resounding solution that, regardless of your political persuasion or how you view this industry, that we can all get around to serve children and students better? And the last part of that question is, how do you think the work that you do today will contribute to your overall legacy, or how do you want that to be defined?
Wow, really great questions, Kevin. And I mean, I'll answer the first one or the second one part of that question first, just because it's the easiest. I mean, in terms of my legacy, I mean, if I can be remembered for like helping some of these kids out that are going through this, then for me that will be more than enough. If a child or a family does not have to go through what I went through and what so many other kids went through, that for me is like I've done my job. I've more than done my job with this. Outside of that, you know, I could care less how I'm remembered or you know what people think or you know whatever. But in terms of the overall solution to this is, you know, I think that we should hold behavioral health care practitioners, particularly on the adolescent side, we should hold them to the same standards and we should adopt the same standards in adolescent as well as adult mental health care and substance abuse that we do in, you know, standard physical health care, physical medicine. And I'll give you an example of that. Like these treatment center owners, if you were a heart surgeon or a cardiovascular specialist and you had a practice and you had marketing material and you were putting out marketing material and figures that were not scientifically grounded or based, you know, that practitioner, that doctor would not be in business very long. And if that cardiologist had like a one in, you know, say he did heart surgeries and out of every 10 heart surgeries he did, 4 people died, you probably would never go to see that heart surgeon again. That's like a pretty abysmal track record. You know, it's like, you know, 4 out of 10 die, but hey, you got a 6 in 10 chance. There's no way in hell I'd send my kid or my grandmother or anybody else I knew to that doctor. But those are kind of the same standards that we're operating off of in mental health care. Also, you would never, if you went to see a doctor or you were in an intensive care unit for some kind of procedure or issue that you just had, and the entire intensive care unit was operated by residential, medical school residents, you'd probably have a hard time with that. You'd be like, what the heck is going on here? Why is there not like a licensed doctor overseeing all of these kids that aren't even finished with medical school yet? But in the behavioral health industry, we kind of let that happen. 80% of the care is administered by people that they're either associate clinicians, so they don't have they finish school, but they don't have a license yet. So they're the equivalent of like a medical school resident or intern. Or they have some kind of online certification that you can get within like a couple hours, which is the equivalent of like a CPR certification or something like that. You would never let that fly in hospitals. Hospitals are run by licensed nurses, doctors, and social workers. Those are the people who operate and run hospitals. It's one of the reasons that they're kind of costly operations to keep going and keep off the ground. But costly as they are, they operate with a level of efficiency that we come to expect from modern medicine. What if I can be remembered for doing anything, or my overarching message to providers and all of that is I think that we should hold the behavioral health industry and behavioral health care practitioners to higher standards than we currently hold them to now. And if I can be remembered for helping raise that bar, then I think that's something that has both bipartisan and urban, rural. It crosses all social, economic, and racial cleavages.
Yeah, absolutely. And Corey, finally, tell me if people want to get connected with the great work that you're doing. What's the best way they can do that, my friend?
Yeah, they can find me on gentryconsultingservices.com, spelled Jentry, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn and can be looked at there. And if anyone's interested, and I hope they are, in reading my book and looking into any of the advocacy work that is spawned from that, it is available on Amazon.com.
Fabulous. Well, my friend, we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. This was certainly a wide-ranging and in-depth conversation about teenage mental health and everything that surrounds that important topic. So I want to thank you for your work in the space and for joining me this afternoon. It's most appreciated, my friend.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I did.